direction you want to take things, we'll make it happen.
Yeah, man.
Let's do it. Let's do it, man.
All you, Aton.
What's going on, guys? Welcome to the shop. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Dynasty Diagnostic podcast. My name is Aton Mosier. You can find me on Twitter at AtonAlive. And I'm joined by Sam Stompy Lane. You can find him on Twitter at FFStompy. And as is generally the case, maybe even a bit more so today, I am beyond thrilled to introduce our guest. But I've run into a hiccup here. It seems that I have to do something special to make him appear. I have to enter a cheat code of sorts. So here it is. Up, up, down, down, left, right, be a start. And here he is, the Swami of Konami himself, and the man responsible for coining the Konami code term that is so widely used amongst fantasy analysts and laymen alike. What's going on, Rich Hribar?
That was an impressive intro. I'll take that. I wish I got that every time. I like that. You dropped a little code in there. Yeah, listen, I'll take that. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you guys. We're kind of still in this hotbed of information here for fantasy football with the free agency. Kind of on the last legs here as we head into the draft. We had a trade tonight. So we'll take all the NFL news we can get. We've all got our fingers crossed that that come September, we're going to be playing football. We all want it. We all want football to be here. So we're approaching things as if we're going to get it. So let's hope for the best.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
No, yeah, let's be realistic, because hype videos like the one I've seen on Jameis Winston dodging what looks like a ball sack running at his head, that doesn't need to be hyped at this point. And I think people are getting real bored.
That is grade A quality training. All right, Stompy, that is the best of the best. That's the pinnacle of training available in the NFL.
Have you seen Jameis's workout? Did you see the clip from a few weeks ago where he was doing like the up down kind of? See, Jameis works out like a regular guy. I kind of like that. He makes me feel like I have some athleticism still.
I'll give him this. He actually looks slimmer, and at least we know his LASIK works for about 2 to 4 feet in front of him. Right?
Right.
He's not going to get hit in the head by, I don't know, a linebacker coming at him 100 miles an hour, or at least he'll see him 4 feet away from his face.
So far, if you've taken anything away from this podcast, is that you too out there, ladies and gentlemen, can be a starting NFL quarterback through your rookie contract. If Jameis Winston can do it, you can do it too. And that's what we're here to do, inspire the folks. All right, so if you're not already following Reach Hribar, you should be. You can find him on Twitter at Lord Reeves. You can find all of his work at Sharp Football Analysis. He's just one of the few guys out there that is actively making everybody he comes into contact with smarter, and we are very appreciative for that. But I want to jump right into this. I have just a really, really heavy background in gaming. I've been gaming for a long time. Double Dragon was one of the things that brought me up in this world. Ocarina of Time is my favorite game. I have to ask you, man, Swami of Konami himself, what is your favorite game? How did you get into gaming, and kind of tell us the story surrounding that?
I mean, I'm just the right age for it. Nintendo came out, 1986. I was born in 82. So it just kind of something I've always had in my life, so I've just grown up with it. We still haven't reached the point where like all of us have become, grandparents and, older, and it's just part of our life where, 80-year-old people are playing video games because it's all we know. It's what we grew up with. I always laugh about that and like, hip hop music, because I wait for the day it's like 75-year-old people, still just, listening in the car, because we just haven't hit those times where people just, you grew up with it and it's always just been ingrained in your life and you always had it around. We haven't had that exist for that age group yet. And eventually we're going to get there. But yeah, I've just always been around. I actually was just in a video game draft with a bunch of guys on Twitter. Jake Steely from The Athletic ran it. It was 64-bit and under was all we could choose. But my first round pick was Chrono Trigger, which is basically like the first game I really, really fell in love with for the SNES. I mean, I liked other games before that, but that one was like a trigger point for me that like opened my, eyes up to the RPG world, the complete nerddom. Listen, I'm full on nerd, have been like that since I was younger. But I remember just trying to twist my mom's arm to pay it was $80 at the time, that game, and trying to twist my mom's arm to like drop the $80 this video game for me, for just a young kid trying to get a video game. And I finally wore down and got it, did some extra work around the house and got it. And that kind of was the no pun intended, but was the trigger, to get to just set it off. So I mean, that's one of my all-time favorite games. I hold it in high regard. But I mean, obviously now, like this gaming has changed so much, and it's such a luxury for us, compared to where we started, and the technology seems to develop so quickly. These games are just insane now. But I'm still playing. I still play new stuff. It's I have a PS4, so things have slowed down the past year. They're about to have two final releases here before we get that PS5 in September. We'll have that Final Fantasy VII remake, and then that Last of Us 2. Hopefully, they delayed it, with the coronavirus going on. But those are two games I'm really looking forward to when they come out.
Sam, you have something to say?
I mean, I don't know half of the games or the game that you're talking about, but I was my first my first console was a PlayStation original, and one of my best memories of my dad is him like playing with him and trying to figure out Gex, the first one, and then I started playing Enter the Gecko, and then like Rayman. Like, this is back in the day. So those are some of my favorite memories of playing video games. But I mean, Gex is kind of one of those that holds a special place in my heart. So I feel you on that.
Love it. Absolutely love it. All right, let's get to the boring stuff that I guess we have to talk about, the football stuff. I have a myriad of questions here. I have a whole sheet laid out. You guys already know my exploits with creating just really, really involved, probably over-involved sheets. We're done. We're not even going to get into it right now. We're going to talk about Brandin Cooks being traded from the Los Angeles Rams to the Houston Texans for the same amount, because it looks like it's a second-round pick is probably like the star thing that they got back, that DeAndre Hopkins was traded for. Like, my mind is blown. I love Brandin Cooks as much as the other guy. I think this is a good move overall. I just don't know if that wide receiver core is going to stay healthy at all this season. What are expectations for Brandin Cooks and Deshaun Watson on that Texans team this season?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I got this news late, so I just have a couple of notes, scribbled down for later when I finally dive into this. But, basically the Rams are paying 23% of their, 2020 salary cap to two players they're not going to have on their roster, and Todd Gurley and Brandin Cooks. So that's pretty optimal way to run a franchise, I believe. That's good, probably not going to impact, them being able to add to their offensive line issues. And, they've had some issues. They lost a bunch of players in free agency too as well. They did swing Michael Brockers back. But they've got a lot of holes. This is a team with a lot of holes. They're, from a team that moved the Super Bowl, the year before. But Brandin Cooks himself is just kind of a mixed bag. He's still going to be 27 years old. And prior to last year, he had the 5 straight 1,000-yard seasons. He's going to be on his fourth team in 5 years, so he's no stranger to playing a new quarterback play. He's had the luxury of playing a lot of good quarterbacks, going from Drew Brees to Tom Brady. Jared Goff was, he had a little bit of 15 minutes there, and he's going to get Deshaun Watson now, so he's going to be attached to good quarterback play again. We just don't know how he's going to fit in with this overlap of receivers, though, because it's a lot of overlap in skill set. With Will Fuller, Kenny Stills, they did add Randall Cobb as well. Winston is a guy. He is a high depth of target quarterback. He likes to push the ball downfield. That's why he takes so many bad sacks and negative plays. His rookie year, he had 11.5-yard average depth of target. That was first in the NFL, and he's been at 9.1 yards the past 2 years, which has been top 12 in the NFL. So, I mean, he's going to get the ball downfield to Brandin Cooks. It just depends on, how the target distribution lies for these guys and how they all fit together, because right now, like I said, it's a lot of overlap. We know that Randall Cobb is going to be in the slot, but, we've got Will Fuller and Brandin Cooks, two guys that are, high vertical depth of target players. And then Brandon Cooks himself, just, you look at the last 19 games of his, NFL career in the regular season, he's caught just 63 passes for 823 yards and just 4 touchdowns. It's not like he's been, a high productive commodity to what he's been on the field. Last year he was 70th in the NFL in yards per route run. That's below every member that he's of the wide receiver unit he's going into, below Kenny Stills, below Randall Cobb, below Will Fuller. So he's been a little bit of a depreciating asset. So we need to see if he can just bounce back. And then that's before we even get into the health scares. I mean, he's got 5 registered concussions we know about. We've seen like what that has done for a guy like Jordan Reed. If one concussion, could put him out now several weeks. He's like an instant liability to be sat for multiple weeks through a concussion now. So it's something we've got to keep our pulse on. But on the other side of it, for the Rams side, this does help some players there. I mean, this definitely, if you look at what the Rams did last year, the final from week 13 to week 17 of the season, they used 11 personnel 59% of the time. Prior to that point, it was 76% of the time. 12 personnel was at 40% of the time those final 5 weeks after just 17% of the time. So now we're going to see them probably lean into that because, a guy like Tyler Higbee, he just had a mountain of success like that final month of the season. So now that they've removed Todd Gurley and they removed their wide receiver 3 from the equation, we kind of get an inkling that that's where they're going to swerve into and play some more of that brand of football. So it does help a guy like Tyler Higbee. So I think a lot of people were kind of on the fence on like, can he roll over this 4-game stretch? Was that just, happenstance, or are we going to see them involve Gurley back in the passing game and the wide receiver 3 back in the passing game? Now that kind of alleviates those concerns. And I for me, and even just adjusting projections, off the initial news, it moves Tyler Higbee a couple runs up. I think Tyler Higbee now is the guy that you can start to look at being, having a question now between Tyler Higbee and Hunter Henry. I think that puts him right back into that area and leaps him over a guy like Austin Hooper, kind of where that area is right there. So he gets a big bump. Josh Reynolds gets a modest bump. He had 40 targets last year. You free up 72 targets that Brandon Cooks had. He could probably get into, the 70, 80 range. And if there's an injury to Robert Woods or Cooper Kupp, that could push it, potentially 100 targets if that happens. But yeah, I mean, the big bump goes to Higbee out of all this, I believe. And, it does, give a little bit of boost to Deshaun Watson just because it gives him another weapon. But Deshaun Watson really, like, even removing DeAndre Hopkins from the equation was really only probably going to slide for as low as people to probably like QB5 or 6 at like a lower range of outcomes. So it still just solidifies him there as being like a top front end QB1.
So you're saying Tyler Higbee could be a top 5 tight end is what I just heard Rich Hribar say. So
yeah, I believe
take advantage of that. I'm now questioning, as I've been thinking about it over the last hour or so, what does that say about their confidence in Will Fuller? Because like you said, that Fuller and Cooks, their skill sets overmatch or they have basically the same skill sets, and both are injury prone. They've seen Will Fuller be more injury prone, I suppose, in terms of missed games. Of course, with concussions, you just never know how long the next concussion is going to leave a guy out. But in the meantime, Cooks has only missed 2 games. I mean, not including playoffs, obviously. So what does that say about Will Fuller and their confidence in him staying on the field?
Well, I think that they needed insurance for him, and Randall Cobb definitely wasn't going to be enough. I mean, this is a guy that's missed 22 games in his career and multiple games every season, and they picked up his 5th-year option, so he's not under contract beyond this year either. So I mean, they're not tethered in to him. So I mean, they definitely needed more insurance, and definitely a guy that is under contract a little bit longer than this year. So they definitely had to add some insurance, and I think that's what they did there. I mean, it's just, this Houston plan of attack, though, everyone's getting Bill O'Brien to buy their broken pieces. Like, they're just like, he's the guy everyone calls. He's the dude in your dynasty league. You have a clear sell player, and you've offered him to 5 other teams. And they all said no. You're like, why did I just start at this guy? That's kind of what is going on. He bought David Johnson and Brandon Cooks now this offseason. And Brandon Cooks definitely is a guy that, he could bounce back. Like I said, up until last year, he was a hyper productive player, and he's still playing with a good quarterback that he could still, he said he's only missed 2 games, actually, missed the 2 games. So he's on the field, and Deshaun Watson is Deshaun Watson. There is still, like, I'm not by any means saying just, throw Brandon Cooks out and don't think it's possible he can bounce back. It's just a little bit more unknown at this point. given the injuries and then the lack of production he had, the ineffectiveness he had. But yeah, they definitely needed insurance though for Will Fuller, and I think that's what they've set out and got now.
In 2018, which was Brandon Cook's most recent successful season, we did see, though, that he was actually a good target in most areas of the field. He was 14% over average in the short left third of the field, 23% in the short middle, 11% over average short right on the field. Is there any thought from you that this move, because of the presence of a guy like Will Fuller and of Kenny Stills, that Brandon Cooks might be the guy that is used to be the more versatile guy on that offense, that is used maybe in different target depths than we've seen him throughout the majority of his career so far, just because he kind of has the option of not just being the deep threat on this team?
Yeah, what's interesting is he was that guy, coming out of Oregon State. He was a more versatile player and worked the intermediate area of the field, and was that initially for the Saints, his first year with the Saints, before he kind of got archetyped out into being a downfield threat. They added Michael Thomas the year after that, and Michael Thomas kind of filled in, in the crevices there, and then he went to, New England and served as their vertical guy, and kind of the same thing. He took Sammy Watkins' spot in the offense, in the McVay offense. So, I mean, yeah, he definitely had some of that coming into the league, some of that ability. And so did Will Fuller, to be honest. Will Fuller was like a really good yak guy coming out of Notre Dame. We saw him have some, play yard after the catch, taking some screen passes to the house as a rookie. They've just gotten kind of away from using him that way as well. I believe those guys are capable of doing it. It just depends on if we'll see it, because we just said we've also got Kenny Stills there and, Randall Cobb, and however David Johnson fits in this passing game with Duke Johnson. It is a, kind of a hodgepodge of forgotten assets. There's talent there though. All these guys are, if you go down the list, all those guys are talented and have had productive fantasy seasons and have been productive NFL players. So if this does come together and it does work, I mean, Deshaun Watson's definitely good enough to make these guys work.
There was a tweet out there of his moves over the last 2 seasons, and I looked at it and I was like, he's playing fantasy football in the NFL, because it's like, okay, he's going to go for buy low, win now pieces and like Brandon Cooks and DJ. He's going to sell his highest valued asset to get starters later on. He traded for like Laramie Tunsil as well, and he's looking at like some pieces on the offensive side. So like you said, it's kind. What? Sorry,
you at a holdout right there with Laramie Tunsil. That's likely scenario this year.
Well, we'll see. But point still stands is that you're right. It's like the island of misfit toys, but they all have talent and have had talent in the very recent past. Maybe not David Johnson because of injuries and stuff, and so if everybody's healthy and it works out, like you said, they could easily win the AFC South at this point.
I mean, we're just going to pencil in for that afternoon Saturday wildcard game because that's where they're always at.
Yeah, fair enough. There you go.
This year it'll be at 1:00, so we'll move them up a little bit to lunchtime.
All they have to hope for, it's not the Cincinnati Bengals. That's the only thing that they have to hope for.
I love it. All right, so that's the brand new news out of the way. Let's kind of go on into some of the things that I did have prepared before this. You already mentioned Konami code twice. Speaking to you, I'm sure that is something that you get on every podcast, but I mean, it's still very, very interesting for everyone to kind of see the origin of where this even came from. So let me ask you about that. What was the driving force to lead you to do that research that saw that quarterbacks were so much more valuable when they actually had the ability to use their legs as well? And what gave you the, I guess, kind of final push to name that or to coin that Konami code term, and why do you think it's become so prevalent?
Well, yeah. So, as a gamer, I've always, been, more of a late round quarterback guy, even before I was, doing this publicly. And, it was the Tim Tebow year, and Tim Tebow was objectively a bad quarterback. When you watched him, you're like, this guy's not good, but he was a really productive, hyper productive for fantasy because he had this rushing floor and he was good. And, I remember being younger and my buddies I picked him up and had when my buddies were mad because they're like, this guy's terrible. How does he have 20 points? How does he have 20 points right now? He completed 9 passes. Like, how does he have 20 fantasy points? And then, so the year I was in the industry, it was when Terrell Pryor was named the starter for the Raiders. And, I did a guest little piece for my buddy JJ Zachariason for Number Fire, and kind of just brought that in. I said, hey, I know that this is a thing, like that running quarterbacks have a high floor, and the way it's scored is you can take advantage of it. And like, people are just, dumping on Terrell Pryor, and it's like, this guy could actually might be able to do something for fantasy. And he did have a couple of like games. Remember the week 1, everyone played him in DFS. There was like a big, I don't know if you guys remember that, they played the Colts still in week 1, and there was like a big like back and forth because he was super cheap, and people were like, he's terrible, this isn't real. And I was like, no man, I'm playing him every DFS lineup, it doesn't matter. And he ended up hitting. He had like 18 or 19 points. Like, he didn't set the world on fire, but he was definitely hit value and was definitely productive. But the way it just came up was like the way I laid it out. It was like, this is kind of a cheat code, because it's not, you think about drafting good players, and you don't have to be a good quarterback if you can run. And that's why I just rolled it into the famous video game code of all time, and it just kind of led off the article, and just kind of stuck from there. And but now we've seen, as the eras have gone by, and we're in knee deep into the biggest era of rushing quarterbacks ever. Like, it's, and it's just human evolution. We've just got more athletes playing the quarterback position than we did when I was younger, in the 80s and 90s. We've got just a lot better athletes playing position. If you look at rushing production in the NFL and the amount of rushing attempts that quarterbacks have occupied league-wide, rushing yardage, NFL rushing touchdowns, and then rushing fantasy points, we're in like just an all-time, boon of that type of production. I've got an article on this, even wrapping up the 2019 season as like a fallback and showing how it still continued to spike. This year had the most fantasy rushing points in any fantasy season in league history for a quarterback position. Quarterbacks had 80 rushing touchdowns this year, which is the most they've had. So I mean, we're just still we're still right in this. And obviously, we had a guy that became like the king of Konami this year in Lamar Jackson. We had a quarterback rush for 1,200 yards, and not only did he rush for 1,200 yards, he broke the system because he threw for 36 touchdowns. When you get both, and Deshaun Watson was like the, kind of like the highlight of this before Lamar, is you're getting best of both worlds. You can double dip into both. Not only do you have a high floor, but then you've got a high ceiling. We've seen like the MVP season from Cam Newton. Anytime like these guys can flirt with 30 passing touchdowns on top of their rushing production, they're a tough out in fantasy every week. And then Lamar, like I said, just broke it. So I mean, I hope that he kicks down the door and has opened up the eyes for NFL team building. Because before then, Lamar Jackson, like, he could easily went to a spot where a team tried to make him acquiesce to being a quarterback in their system. And the Ravens went all in on Lamar Jackson's skill set and built around that. And hopefully teams see, how that's the way to do it. Build your scheme around your players and not vice versa. So maybe that opens the door for a guy like Jalen Hurts, to be more productive and get drafted higher than he typically would have because of the success that Lamar Jackson just had. But we are knee deep into the era of Konami right now because everyone's moving around now back there.
So before you go into the next topic there, Eitan, because he gave you a perfect transition point there with Jalen Hurts. So on Tebow, I remember that year that he started the last, was it 14 games?
I don't.
No, that was 2010. Sorry.
Yeah.
So I actually traded for Tim Tebow. I traded Drew Brees and Gronkowski and for Tebow, and I think it was and I just forgot his name. It was the running back for the Cowboys and then the Eagles, and I just forgot his name.
Oh, DeMarco Murray?
Yeah, DeMarco Murray. But I traded for Tebow, and everybody made fun of me for it. And I was like, listen, he's giving me like a 15-point floor literally every game. I don't have to worry about quarterback. And I'm with you. Like, he was so bad. I mean, 46.5% that next season in terms of completion percentage. But like you said, I think he had a 2-for-7 game where he threw 1 touchdown and 69 yards. It was against the Chiefs. He threw it to Eric Decker. I remember that goddamn game. But he can run for like 60, 70 yards, and you've already made your day right there at QB. So, I mean, that's a perfect example for why Russian quarterbacks are great. And then the other thing is, and I think I've told you this, Rich, is that I have tagged that article at least 5 times in articles I've written. I wrote a Lamar Jackson article last season, and I wasn't the head of that train, but I was pretty far forward on that one.
That worked out.
In my Patrick Mahomes article the previous season, I tagged that because he was also a good runner in college.
Mm-hmm.
Dak Prescott is another one where he 500 yards and 6 touchdowns basically every season. It's a great article, by the way. It's the article I know almost by heart at this point because I've read it so many times, but I mean, it's such a perfect article for where we're going, like you said, into the NFL with guys like Kyler Murray, who had success last year in his rookie season. Josh Allen has had success in his first 2 seasons. Ryan Tannehill only threw the ball 25 times last season, and he was, I believe, the QB3 from week 7 on. So that it tells you exactly what those rushing QBs can do. And and you brought up Jalen Hurts. A lot of people are down on Jalen Hurts because of his passing ability, which I think is the concerns are a bit overblown. But when you compare it to Tim Tebow, it's like Tim Tebow was successful, well, at least for 1 season, and he was atrociously bad at throwing the ball.
Wasn't it under 50% that season?
46.5% the season that he started 14 games. But you have guys like Cam Newton who have been extremely successful, and they're not great passers. Josh Allen's not a great passer by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, he made a market improvement last season, jumping 6%, but he's still only completing 58% of his passes. So that brings up Jalen Hurts, which I think is a good transition into this class. And is he another one of those guys that's going to kind of, I guess, buck the he can't be successful because he can't pass trend? I mean, should he be looked at more now as a great or a starting quarterback in the NFL because of the way that the NFL is going?
Well, I believe he should. The question we'll find out in 2 weeks is, where does the league actually view him? We've kind of heard a lot, and obviously we're in the peak season of listen to everything, believe nothing, as far as draft rumors go. But he was a guy that supposedly improved his stock at the combine, especially from a throwing stance, in the drills. Apparently he, a lot of people thought it was a very positive for him. And we just need to see the capital. We need to see the investment. Is he a 3rd rounder? Is it a team trade back in the late 1st for him? Is he a 2nd rounder? We just need to see where the capital is. When is he going to get his first opportunity, and what kind of opportunity is it? Because like we talked about Lamar Jackson. I mean, Lamar Jackson very easily could have went to a coaching staff that didn't have the foresight to use him like Lamar Jackson, and we wouldn't have gotten to the point we are. Granted, he still would have ran around and done some things, but they went all in on building the offense around him. Now Jalen Hurts doesn't have the full-on rushing ability of Lamar Jackson, but he definitely has a wealth of athleticism. I mean, he's 89th percentile for quarterbacks. He obviously has a major trump card still rushing. He's got he ran for 3,300 yards in college and 40 rushing touchdowns in college. But he was an objectively better passer than people give him credit for, and he was a lot better passer than Lamar Jackson, entering the league. I mean, definitely Lincoln Riley gets some credit. I mean, for the high, yards per attempt, and the Big 12 defenses get some credit as well. But you still have a guy that played for 2 high-caliber programs in the collegiate level, in Alabama and Oklahoma, and was an objectively above average passer, and not was the only above average passer in terms of career marks and career yards per attempt. He's 91st percentile of quarterbacks coming into the league, since 2000, guys that were invited to the combine, 90th in touchdown to interception rate. This guy doesn't turn the ball over. He doesn't throw picks. Whereas just, we have a guy like Jordan Love climbing the ranks. Those guys that always are turnover prone, they have a huge arm, always get moved up though. They always seem to get moved up, and everyone loves Jordan Love this year. But Hurts doesn't turn the ball over, which is a pro in his column. So, I mean, we just have to see what kind of opportunity he gets. But he is a guy I have reserved 2nd round Superflex dynasty picks for. Whether he strikes out or not, I am just reserving a 2nd round Superflex pick for him in every draft I can. And, a lot of people in my leagues know that. And a couple of A couple leagues have beat me to the punch on it, but I've already grabbed him in a few leagues where we draft before the actual NFL draft, before we even see capital invested into him, just because I know what kind of upside he carries for fantasy if he does hit, and it's a lot more upside than if a guy like Jake Fromm hits, or even Jordan Love or Jacob Eason, because from our neck of the woods, I mean, that's what we care about is the overall fantasy production. And if Jalen Hurts becomes a starting quarterback, he has as high as a fantasy ceiling as any of these guys, even though Burrow and Tua had definitely have ranked over those guys. They're going to go in the top 5, top 10, and they're going to be handed the keys right away to an NFL offense, which matters. But Jalen Hurts has just as much upside as those guys from a fantasy stance, even if it's not a real NFL stance, like you said, from the names you brought up.
So let's take this to the nth degree. Going into next season, we're going to have two really highly rated prospects coming out of the quarterback position as well. At least we think we are, most likely, in Trevor Lawrence and in Justin Fields. So with knowing the extra floor that you get with that rushing production being a main part of what these quarterbacks are able to do for fantasy teams, I mean, are you almost even willing to kind of have Fields over a guy like Lawrence, even with the perception out there that Lawrence is so much better? Obviously, Lawrence can run as well, but I mean, does that make up for it?
I mean, it could, just like you said, all that depends on these guys is investment. If Fields is gonna have a stronger season as he had last year and work his way where he's just in the top 10 conversation as well, then yeah, that totally fits the bill. I mean, Lawrence has a little bit of mobility too. I mean, definitely that touchdown against Ohio State. I didn't think he really had that in it, man.
That's what I was thinking about. Yeah,
that 70-yarder. I mean, I didn't like when that happened like live. I was just like, oh, this is all right. No one's catching this dude. Like he is striding, and even this year, Burrow is a guy that he comes in with a lot more mobility and rushing production than people probably realize he had, because just his passing stats were so gaudy. But the last 2 years, he ran for 400 yards and 368 yards his 2 seasons as a starter at LSU. So he's got some mobility as well, which gives him some upside. Justin Herbert's a guy that can move around a little bit, and probably I think has questionable, passing acumen as well, but he can move around a little bit too, which helps him. So, I mean, like you said, I just think it's just the evolution of these players coming in the league. The statue quarterback they're not even playing in college anymore. Like you kind of hit on. Everyone coming into the league has got mobility. Daniel Jones last year, mobility. All these guys can move around now, and that's what we care about, and that just boosts their floor. I mean, there's only 2 solutions you can have. Either you add more quarterbacks to your starting lineup when we've seen Superflex get more popular, or you alter the scoring, which we know a lot of people are just reluctant to do and slow to do, where you make kind of QB yards kind of worth QB yards instead of the weight they get, because the rushing yards just carry so much weight right now. Even if you have a great passer that just offers you no rushing floor at all, take like Drew Brees where he's at right now. He even bounced back, had a phenomenal year last year, but he's just not able to score along the level with these guys, even as registering 5,000 passing yards or pacing towards 35 touchdowns. If you're not adding those 50 to 60 rushing points, you lose that, and it's just that era of quarterback is starting to just kind of gradually go away. And we've seen a team like the Chargers openly say, we're not going to bring back Phillip Rivers because we want more mobility back at that position. We want to have a guy that can move around more, and we're kind of seeing that archetype of passer, kind of just find its way out of the NFL.
Do you think this realization of teams of the value of the rushing quarterback eventually leads to teams making less investment at the offensive line positions over time?
I don't know. I haven't done enough studies to see if if it was a tangible impact, because obviously the Ravens had a good offensive line. They've got a lot of really good pieces. They lost Yanda this year, but Ronnie Stanley's a really good piece on that offensive line. Maybe we'll see this year with the Chargers, or if the difference of them going from Tyrod to start the year, and maybe potentially Herbert if they take him at 6 behind that offensive line, what it does. But I haven't really looked into it enough to say from like a study stance that like these guys are going to scramble more and flee the pocket more over designed runs. But we're seeing more guys get get the QB is getting more designed runs than ever in NFL history, the quarterback position. So, I mean, the design runs are a big deal of it as well. And obviously it's not just Lamar. I mean, Dak's a guy that's, cleared, 15% designed runs every year. Josh Allen has been that way. Cam was kind of the dude that kicked the door down in that. It's not just scrambling. Like Russell Wilson is a scrambler. They ran a little bit of RPO the one year. He had the 6 rushing touchdowns. His last year he ran a lot. But when he's getting his rushing yards, they're coming off of scrambles and via scrambles, not designed runs. He's not really that kind of guy anymore. But those other quarterbacks that we named, those guys, their teams are involving them into the design run game. And the Chiefs did a little bit of that in the Super Bowl with Patrick Mahomes. And Patrick Mahomes, you brought up his collegiate rushing, and we didn't really see it in the NFL up until the back half of last year. And when he came back from that knee injury, you look at his final 7 games, he's rushing for 55 plus yards a game. And if Patrick Mahomes is going to do that on top of his passing acumen, I mean, good luck, man. I mean, to real NFL teams and fantasy teams.
Well, at this point, we've discovered how useful RPO can be. I mean, RG3 played a lot of it in his rookie season, obviously got injured, and that was unfortunate, but it was very successful. I mean, Carson went from year 1 to year 2, improved tremendously. And I think it's largely because they decided to build that offense around his skill set and what he did in college. And they did a lot of RPO type stuff too. He wasn't obviously the most prolific runner, but he's a big dude who ran for 642 yards in his junior season. So, I mean, and I think and mind you, this is me just speculating, but I think it does help the offensive line though, and it helps the quarterback stay safe because RPO kind of throws a wrinkle in there for the defense where they can't necessarily just go after the quarterback the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, any pause, any extra time you get for that quarterback, any extra half second or whatever it is a world of difference. And I think that can definitely help people going forward and help these young quarterbacks be very useful during their rookie contracts when the team is built in a way to spend money at the skill positions and spend money at other parts of the team to give that team the best chance to win while that quarterback is still on a deal that allows them to do so. So I really do hope that we see this, or we continue to see this moving forward. So let's go away from the Konami code talk into the worksheet, which was just a piece of work that you've done. That kind of encompasses just everything you look at when it comes to team matchups. Talk to me about the origin of that and kind of what you were looking to do when you started writing that piece.
Well, I mean, as you guys know, just being in this field, I mean, it's a saturated field. A lot of people are writing fantasy content. And I mean, really, the best way to kind of get on the board is to just have something unique and different that someone's not doing. And that's kind of just where the worksheet stemmed from. It was kind of, I wanted to take something that was, had all a top-down view of the matchups, but also had it from, you looked at not just the individual player matchups because people were writing up players, but you got that in the article, but you also got the team matchup view. You got the, the lines are involved, definitely all the teams and what they're doing, run pass splits, things like that. And then random bullet points and facts on the game, just different kind of things like that. I always wanted to have something unique in there. So when you read something that I write, I want it to be like, oh, I haven't read that this week. I've read a bunch of matchup. I've read a bunch of pieces on this, Patriots Chiefs matchups, but man, that one had like 3 things that I haven't seen in any of the other things, any of the other pieces I wrote. That's just kind of what I try to bring to the table. Something I want you to everything I write, I want it to at least you come away with something like, yeah, I haven't seen that. I didn't see it from that angle. I haven't heard that stat yet. Just kind of what I tried to do and do it for every game of the week. And granted, a lot of people have tried to come and do something like that, but they found out how much work it was. I mean, it's also been a detriment to me because now that I've done it for so long, it's just like, oh, I pigeonholed myself into doing all this work at this point. But it's still, but I do it so early in the week, it kind of sets me off, and I'm pretty sharp for the rest of the week. And it really is a great tipping point to do it that early in the week and just have a grasp on the games and for where it leads into DFS, setting lineups in my own leagues and everything like that. So yeah, I just try to make something unique to the table because like a lot of people are doing stuff in this field, and I just wanted it to be something you can go and it'd be kind of special.
How useful have you found looking at pace and looking at the over-unders to be and actually being able to formulate the analysis that you do in that worksheet?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been someone that's looked at game script. When I was at RotoViz in my early days, I did a bunch of game script articles, and a lot smarter people than me have taken that idea and, tweaked it and calibrated it further to, to more predictability. I mean, a guy like Pat Thorman is a guy that does a great job. He writes a pace article every week that's just really functional. I mean, when you look at these teams, we want to understand like the amount of plays teams are on, how many drives they're going to have, because we care about possessions. We care about how many times the team's going to get the ball, what they're going to do at these types of, what they're going to do at the plays, how much overall volume a game's going to have. So you can predict the overall volume, or at least get in the right area. I mean, you're going to have a pretty good grasp on being able to project the individual players in that game, at least from a usage standpoint. I mean, efficiency is inherently more variant. But yeah, I mean, that's what we want to do. We want to take that top-down view at the matchup and kind of see, like, yeah, this team's playing the Detroit Lions. When Jim Bob Cooter was there, they were a notorious slow team and grinded everyone to a halt and dragged everyone down. You could have a team that was running 68, 70 plays per game, and they're going to come in and run low 60s, high 50s. And you say, well, it's just 10 plays, but that's a whole functional possession of a game. That's a whole scoring drive that you're essentially losing out on in a game. So I mean, yeah, pace matters. How much teams want to run in that type of matchup. We want teams that play bad defense. We want teams that go up and down the field because we want those points. But definitely, yeah, looking at a per drive, per play basis has really been able to increase the predictability and accuracy of projections over the years.
On a personal note for me, yeah, I definitely agree, especially with those over-unders. Las Vegas knows what they're doing. So they have algorithms and the like that.
Oh, yeah.
They know exactly what they're doing. So I think that's the main point here, is use the data that you have. I mean, those over-unders help me tremendously with my accuracy in terms of start sits. I obviously don't go as in depth as you, since you're one of my the people I look up to in terms of writers. But yeah, I mean, over-unders, I know I look a lot at Football Outsiders for like their DVOA and defensive rankings and stuff like that, to just understand exactly how that game is going to go that given week.
Yeah, Sharp Football Stats. We do pace a play for neutral, game script, everything. We have all that at Sharp Football Stats. And that site is open to the public and, will remain open to the public even, depending what goes on this season. So definitely check that out if you're someone that's new to that. Just go look at that and see how fast. Because you can see when you have a bad team, you're like, well, this team plays fast. Well, they play fast because in the second half, they're just trailing by 14 points every week. And they're running a lot of plays and up-tempo because they have to. But, when you can separate pace of play, and then look at what teams are doing in neutral game script, and when they're ahead, trailing on scoreboard. I mean, you get an overall encompassing better look at what teams are actually trying to do, and that makes a bigger difference. When you're projecting teams and players on a weekly basis.
I used Sharp Football Stats a ton last year for. I was looking at run pass ratios and just looking at how offenses were run. And you can definitely tell, okay, well, they obviously run a ton, and this team sucks at stopping the run. So probably a good idea to start that running back.
Oh, yeah. It's my fallback for success rates over average. It's my fallback for looking at how teams are actually lining up at the line of scrimmage, what they're coming out in, because that gives you an idea as to what types of things you're going to see from the teams and what types of players are going to benefit for those situations. For example, we expect the Rams to run a lot of 12 this year, so there's room for both Higbee and Everett somewhat to have a little bit of a role in that offense, and you might not necessarily have got that unless you truly know and truly understand how that team comes out on a play-by-play basis. But I just want to clarify a little bit. Stoppy, you said Las Vegas is smart. Las Vegas sportsbooks are smart.
Okay, fine. You knew what I meant.
Looking at the Las Vegas team, I mean, I'm always of the opinion that, I mean, you can find the one team out there that you want to start players against. For me, that's the Raiders this year. Is there another team that's out there for you that you think that, okay, well, depending on how the draft goes, I think this might be a team that every league, everything has a sucker. This might be the one that you start people against week in, week out.
Oh, bar none, the Carolina Panthers. Like, not even a question. Like this, they don't even have 11 quality starters on the roster right now. Remember last year they were horrendous against the run. Like they couldn't stop anyone on the ground. There was a game they played, like even late in the year they played the Redskins, and just the Redskins even have to throw. The Redskins beat them because both Geis and AP both went over 100 yards. I think they had a lot of rushing touchdown basically, and I want to say like their last like 14 or 15 games last year, they were just awful. They're going to be awful again, and then paired into the offense. No longer do we have this, offense that's, led by Ron Rivera, in this coaching, Norv Turner, Norville. It's going to be Matt Rule and Joe Brady. And, it's an intriguing offense, I believe. They've got, not high echelon wide receivers outside of DJ Moore, but guys that can do unique things. They've got a young tight end in Ian Thomas. They've obviously got, this era's Marshall Faulk in their backfield. That's a team that's, I think, going to play in a ton of high scoring games. Definitely, we're going to circle a lot of guys to stream against the Carolina Panthers at all positions.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think Tampa Bay, their secondary is still atrociously bad. They're still a high-powered offense. Whether Tom Brady has to throw as much as Jameis Winston is still under question, because Jameis Winston obviously created more passing attempts because of his turnovers, but they're still a high-powered offense. Two great outside receivers. O.J. Howard can be a great tight end. We'll see what they do in the draft if they get another running back in there. But overall, going to be still a high-powered offense with a bad secondary. So I think much like last year, again, Tampa's a team that, especially your pass-catching assets and your quarterbacks, you're going to want to stream against Tampa.
Yeah, and that whole division, Atlanta's in that same boat. Basically, Saints have a formidable defense.
Lattimore kind of died in the first half of the season last season. I don't know what happened there.
The quarterback throw down.
But that's going to be a fun division for sure. They're playing a lot of shootout.
Oh yeah, I'm also looking at the Rams and the Cardinals. I think that they're going to be teams that you're going to want to target again this year. The Rams, just because they don't have any money to pay anybody anymore. Like, that team is, for me, it's done. It's pretty much already done. Like, they have draft picks, but they don't have anything in the first round. They have a lot of holes on that roster, and I think that coupled with their pace of play last year, which was one of the highest in the league, is just going to cause a lot of shootouts as well.
Yeah, and the Rams offense, we didn't touch upon it in the open, but I think a lot of people left last season with just a sour taste on a lot of the Rams, players outside of even the way it ended for, Cooper Kupp in the second half of the season for him. But the last 5 weeks of the season, they were a legitimately good fantasy offense again. They averaged 29 points per game the final 5 weeks of last year, and we kind of touched on what Tyler Higbee did and everything. So they were productive still. Jared Goff actually had a really strong finish fantasy-wise the year, which was the inverse of what he did the year prior. So it's going to be interesting if they do play in a little bit more shootouts and they're a little bit more effective. Is a guy like Goff going to bounce back and be one of those guys you can count on in the high QB2 range, to kind of outkick his production? Because a lot of people, I think, are just down on him and think that he had a throwaway year last year. I think it ended a lot more productively than I think people realize. All
right, so I got to ask this to everybody who comes on the show, everybody who's smarter than both of us here. Who are you drafting earlier than everyone, and why?
So far this year, I've mostly been working. I like to just say from like a fun stance, I guess we'll just say like later guys I've been drafting. Just at this point, Steven Sims is a guy I've been drafting, late in these drafts just because he's free, basically. He touched the ball. He had a punt return, a kick return, running touches, and then he gets the ball in the passing game. The final month of the season, he had 20% of the team targets. He's got that, yak ability. They haven't added they didn't add any free agent wide receivers. We assume they're still going to add some guys in the draft, but they haven't added anyone yet. So if they don't add a pure slot guy, I think he's still like a guy that is going to be ahead of the curve there. Top rounds, I'm infatuated with Miles Sanders, like just absolutely infatuated with him. It seems like people are trying to talk themselves out of Miles Sanders, but I want in. I want Miles Sanders on my roster. He's got that sizzle in the passing game, what we look for. He doesn't have that big archetype. He's not 220 pounds, but he's kind of in that Alvin Kamara build, DeAndre Swift build. But talk about explosive pass plays. He's a guy that doesn't have to have 300 rushing attempts, and he's not going to get him in that offense. People keep talking about the split. He can share with a guy like Boston Scott, or if they do bring in another guy. He's a guy I believe is still kind of undervalued. I think people are kind of 1 foot in and 1 foot out on him, but I've got 2 feet in. Definitely am buying in on him. Chris Herndon, just because I think when you're looking at late round tight ends, there's another avenue I like to shop outside of best balls. It's definitely shown there's a significant advantage to getting in on tight end early in a best ball league. But when waiting on these tight ends, because it's a deep bucket of guys you can try to sell yourself on this year at the tight end position. Pick your flavor. Is it Jonnu Smith? Is it Ian Thomas? Is it Mike Gesicki? Is it one of the sophomore guys? Is it OJ Howard bouncing back? Is it Blake Jarwin? It is a deep bucket of guys. But when I look at taking my tight ends, and it's a reason why we were into Darren Waller last year, is I want to look at the surrounding depth chart too and say, well, this guy has potential to lead the team in targets. And Chris Herndon is one of those guys. If the Jets don't take a wide receiver at 11, it doesn't even matter if they do take a wide receiver at 11. The odds of a rookie getting 100 targets is probably pretty thin, and probably still pretty thin. We still want to take the pessimistic stance on a rookie wide receiver, and it's just Jamison Crowder and Brashad Perriman, on a 1-year contract too. So Chris Herndon still has a gateway to, if he's over this injury, and he still has a gateway to get a lot of targets, just because the surrounding depth chart is open. And, more so than some of those other guys I talked about, like Ian Thomas is probably kind of roadblock to add Robbie Anderson. He's probably at best the 4th or 5th option. Jonnu Smith, we'd seen Delaney's basically missed the past 2 seasons anyways, and we've seen Ryan Tannehill play at his apex, and Jonnu still wasn't really popping for fantasy. Jarwin's intriguing. You lose Randall Cobb. They haven't filled that spot as well. So, Jason Witten also had 83 targets off the board. So Jarwin's another one of those guys I think that's in that area where it's just really easy to say, his target volume is definitely going to be elevated. Obviously, he's not going to be targeted more than Cooper and Gallup. But, yeah, kind of that's what I'm looking for in taking a late-round tight end is definitely look at that surrounding roster. And because that's where Darren Waller popped last year. There was nowhere else to go. It was easy for him to leapfrog and become the lead target for that offense. And I think that, that's in the range of outcomes when you look at that Jets roster.
So does this mean that you still have some faith for Sam Darnold, even in the midst of being on an Adam Gase offense for a 2nd year in a row?
I'm willing to give Darnold kind of a pass for last year, just on the way it unfolded, for him to just get, have that illness. Because I don't know if you've had mono or known anyone that's had mono, that is that's a wrecking sickness. I remember having a buddy that had mono, and he missed a month of school, lost 25 pounds, and just was wasn't the same for a while. So as an NFL athlete to have, mono, and obviously the treatment's better. And so, but I'm willing to at least say he just wasn't himself, for the rest of the season. Kind of give him a free pass, give him a bounce back year, see what he does this year. But this is definitely going into year 3 of his contract. They're going to want to see some improvement. So I'm willing to say he's not a guy I've really drafted a lot at this point because he's not one of those guys that has that Konami factor. He's not a guy really running around, and that's what I like. But I am still willing to give him a little more rope than I probably would have for a guy having his 2nd season like he did, just because of the surrounding circumstances. But definitely Adam Gase being there is not something that gives a bodes a lot of confidence either, though.
It shouldn't give anybody any confidence ever. Though apparently Le'Veon Bell he had 311 touches last year, so he wasn't as bad off as we thought. I guess for me, just to answer the question quick, early rounds, Austin Eckler. I apparently am taking him earlier than most people. I took him in at 2.7 in a startup recently, and people were astounded. And I was like, "Why are you astounded?" Because he is going into a role that he was I believe a top 3 fantasy producer in the first 4 weeks last season, without Melvin Gordon. And then even after that, I believe he was RB10 for the rest of the season with Melvin Gordon. 108 targets last season, despite a much lower percentage of snaps than those around him had. Tyrod Taylor, we do know, uses his running backs. LaShawn McCoy was very good in Buffalo with Tyrod Taylor. So, 100 I expect him to fill in like he did those first 4 weeks? Not necessarily. That's why I like Justin Jackson late. But I still think he's a top 10 running back this season at the very least, and probably has top 5 potential. If he is the starter, and is that what he produced in those first 4 weeks last season. Curtis Samuel, I think a lot of people are down on Curtis Samuel because they thought he was just a deep threat. But we forget that he played out of the backfield and in the slot a lot for Ohio State. He was just not used that way in Carolina. So he is more suited for the slot, which he should be playing largely this year. With DJ Moore, I think you're only playing like 20% of the snaps from the slot. Curtis Samuel could jump into the top 36 wide receiver. I like Boston Scott as well. We saw he had 26 targets in his last 4 games. I know you like Miles Sanders. I do know that Doug Peterson, we've seen Doug Peterson use a committee approach, maybe not so much this next year because he does have Miles Sanders, but I still expect Boston Scott to get some targets in that backfield. I already mentioned Justin Jackson. And then I just like a lot of the year 2 wide receivers that people forget about. Paris Campbell in an offense that needs another pass catcher. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who – yes, they're bringing back Alshon Jeffrey, but Alshon Jeffrey, can we really rely on him to be healthy? He's built in the same mold as Alshon Jeffrey. At the very least, I don't think it could get much worse than it was last year. And we see a lot of second-year wide receivers break out. Preston Williams, after the ACL injury, people forget about how phenomenal of a season he was having as a rookie. So those are just some of the guys that I've been looking at. And it doesn't even have to be that much early, like a round or 2 earlier than most people are grabbing them. And you could get, and it's not like you're taking this gigantic chance that late in the draft anyway.
So who are you guys fading at all costs? Who you guys think that they're just way overpriced this year? Something in the offense or something with the coach has changed, and they're just not going to be as effective as they've been in the past.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now, and I want to at least give you guys some good players to talk about that we say, yeah. Probably Keenan Allen right now is not looking too appealing, especially with the quarterback change, and he might even get a rookie quarterback at some point, during the season. And he's a guy that, especially playing with Tyrod Taylor, his game is predicated so much, interior and having quarterbacks that have anticipation. Like a guy like Phillip Rivers had. So that is not Tyrod's game. He's a see-it-throw quarterback, and if we get a rookie involved in the mix as well, that only probably hurts things as well. And, his production's been so high the last 3 years, having 102, 97, 104 catches past 3 years. He's a guy. I know a lot of people are going to be talking about touchdown regression for Leonard Fournette, but, Leonard Fournette was really rough the back half of the year when the Jaguars were bad. His final 7 weeks last year, he had just 2 top 20 scoring weeks. Basically was a little bit Le'Veon Bell-ish, just because the team was so bad, and that's another team that's going to be really bad again. I'm really curious. I've been waiting to see if they add a pass catcher as well, because Jay Gruden has been his offensive scheme has thrown to the running backs a lot, and if they do bring like his buddy Chris Thompson in or someone else, with Leonard Fournette going into the final year of his contract, they could bring another pass catcher, because if Leonard Fournette gets those 76 receptions reduced to, say, 46 receptions, that's a big deal for him, because he's not a guy that is getting types of targets that are downfield targets. Leonard Fournette had 100 targets last year at 19 air yards. So talk about getting your targets. Like, those are just complete checkdowns. Like, anybody can come and get those types of targets. Those are not safe targets for him to have by any means. So, like, definitely, hey, he's probably a little overpriced. Obviously, I still think the volume will be there, but just bad team situation, the way he finished the year. Those are 2 guys that are kind of just like stick out at the top of drafts that just I haven't really drafted at all at this point.
I very much agree with Keenan Allen. We just haven't seen Tyrod Taylor use a slot receiver, and even if he starts, it's going to be, I don't think quality of targets is going to be there. They're not probably going to throw the ball nearly as much. Mike Williams is another fade there for me, but I think a pretty obvious one at this point is Mike Evans. We saw Tom Brady's ADOT and yards per attempt and adjusted net yards per attempt all drop over the past 3 seasons. Now, he didn't really have much of a deep threat on the outside there. They were mostly like you had Sanu and Edelman, who were basically short field guys, and then James White. So that could be something, but he just hasn't been throwing the ball downfield as much the last 3 seasons. Maybe that changes with Mike Evans, but I'm not taking that chance, especially with the emergence of Chris Godwin in the slot there, and 2 very capable tight ends. And then I think another one that's kind of I don't know where he's going right now, but Todd Gurley to me seems like a fade because he had his worst season since his sophomore season in terms of efficiency. His targets were down last season. And that offensive line in Atlanta was bad last season, especially in terms of the adjusted line yards. So I don't think he's going to be much more efficient. He's probably going to be less efficient than he was last season. And the saving grace is he can catch the ball, but I don't know how many times they're going to ask him to catch the ball out of the backfield. I don't know what his workload is going to be there. And they have 2 premier pass catchers on the outside there in terms of Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones. So I don't trust Todd Gurley. I mean, the knees are an issue, but the situation's not great either.
Yeah, I think you can probably potentially throw Joe Mixon into that as well. I have a lot of hope for the Bengals offense. I have a lot of hope for what Joe Burrow can do to turn that offense around. But I mean, the situation is still kind of the same situation that it was in last year. You're going to have offensive linemen coming back off of injury, but then they're going to be an experienced offensive lineman being asked to do a lot in that offense. So I think that he's a guy that might be a little bit overvalued. I'm not sure if I agree with Leonard Fournette because I feel like, yes, it's very likely that he loses targets. But if he does lose targets, I think that there is still the ability for him to make it up with another touchdown here or there because of how limited he was at the goal line last year. I just think that there is some drop off there that can be made up for just based on a little bit more touchdown volume. But other than that, Keenan Allen, yeah, I 100% agree. Tyrod Taylor, you talk about his ADOT. He's a guy that is a downfield thrower. So I don't know if I'd put Mike Williams in that same spot because I do think if somebody's going to benefit from that, it's probably going to be a guy who's a deeper target like Mike Williams. And for that reason, I do have a little bit of issue with Austin Eckler so high as well because I'm not sure if Tyrod Taylor is going to be the type of quarterback that's going to be checking down at the same rate as a guy like Phillip Rivers was. Phillip Rivers was kind of Derek Carr-ish in his last few years, just in terms of where he targeted the guys on his team. It's why Keenan Allen was so valuable. It's because he operated in the short area and the intermediate area of the field. I don't see Tyrod as being that same guy that's going to throw anticipatory throws to guys that are going to be heavily covered close to the line of scrimmage. I just think that if he's going to be the quarterback for the year, I think he's going to look for guys deeper down the field. But I do definitely see where you guys are coming from with that. All right, so now let's get into this week's Dynasty Diagnostic. Let's plug in the analyzer and get to our episode 64 roster. Was this submitted by Beryl, Joffrey?
Yes.
Okay, this was submitted by Beryl.
Do you don't trust me?
No, I absolutely don't trust you.
I do my job, man.
This was submitted by Beryl Joffrey. He is in our DDCL league. Please be sure to give him a follow on Twitter. And if you want to be part of next week's show, please follow the podcast at Dino Diagnostic. Smash that subscribe button and leave us a review at the link in the description that I hope is there this time. Sam, doing your job. All right, so it is a 12-team point per reception, 1.5 points tight end premium, 0.25 points per rush, quarterback, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, 3 flex, and 1 super flex roster. At quarterback, we have Carson Wentz, Jimmy G, Tom Brady, Gardner Minshew, Nick Foles, Nick Mullins here. I wanted to ask you this, Rich. Me and Sam actually went back with how much of an upgrade Nick Foles is over a guy like Mitchell Trubisky. And, of course, Trubisky brings the threat of running that Nick Foles does not. But I'm of the opinion that, there is a a significant upgrade here that at least allows the targets in that offense, Anthony Miller and Allen Robinson to hopefully have a little bit more of a stable season this year. I wanted to ask what your thoughts on that were, and if you see Foles getting that job immediately.
Yeah, I don't know. We need to see him win the job. I think a lot of people are giving it to him, but I still think that the Bears would prefer to have Trubisky hit still because, obviously if he were to hit, that there's a lot more longevity than it is a guy like Nick Foles in his stage of his career. Foles on his 15 in 6 years, hasn't thrown more than 200 passes in an NFL season since 2015. And then last year, Foles he was just horrendous. He was ahead of just Devlin Hodges and David Blau in fantasy points created per pass attempt among 2019 passers who started 4 or more games. That's rough. I don't know. I think it could be a little bit of an upgrade just for keeping the offense on schedule a little more. But I don't believe it's a big enough upgrade. I mean, it's just to start making where I'm excited about the other pieces in the offense. It's Allen Robinson's game. It's his passing tree to dominate. I don't believe that either quarterback as a starting quarterback makes me like the other pieces. Like, it's really just still about Allen Robinson. Neither guy starting really does a little bit for me as far as trying to sell me on Anthony Miller or whatever tight end they're going to throw the ball to.
Whichever one of those
Jimmy Graham. It's probably like Brownecker and Jimmy Graham. They're going to smush together. And your body, his mind. It's fine.
Another team that I believe has no idea what they're doing organizationally. The Chicago Bears.
Yes, very much. I do not know what Ryan Pace is doing. Like,
trying to save his job. That's the only explanation, because bringing in Nick Foles when you have the option of signing these free agent quarterbacks that are probably a lot better than him, spending a 4th round pick on Nick Foles makes no sense to me.
So can I ask you a question? How you felt, Reeves, about David Montgomery coming out?
I was kind of just a mixed bag. He showed up like kind of all right, just not an explosive, dynamic player. Kind of more volume induced. He did play behind a terrible offensive line in college, but yeah, just not typically what I look for out of a running back. I mean, I want guys that that churn out explosive plays at the amateur level. Because it's an athletic-based position at the amateur level. So I want guys to at least show and dominate at that level. He really wasn't there. He was just kind of like a ham and egger. Just he's not a bad player, just a guy you can give some volume to, and he's got a big body, but he's not terrible in the pass game, but just like I said, just like a real basic guy, kind of a replaceable functional player.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, he's got his skill sets. People were comparing him to Kareem Hunt, and I was like, that. I mean,
the new thing for people in prospects is, they love some broken tackles. Missed tackles forced at the collegiate level is like the thing now coming in, because Zach Moss is that guy this year. That's kind of what all the Zach Moss supporters are hanging on to is, look at all the missed tackles he forced. But again, another guy that just has a very baseline skill set.
Well, it's one of those.
He's not terrible in any area, but he's also just not a guy that is operating with any spades, really.
Well, and like you said, explosiveness, and I agree there. When I watched Montgomery, he just didn't have the explosiveness, the speed that I think translated, and I think we saw it last season. He couldn't hit the holes fast enough in the NFL, and I think you're probably going to see the same with Zach Moss. So be wary of Zach Moss.
Yeah, people cite volume with these guys, but I mean, at the running back position, at least, I think volume is largely just what the offensive coordinator, what the offense, what that head coach is willing to give you. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are grabbing that and you are forcing them to put you in those positions. It's kind of just a thing that's going to happen. So when I see these guys with limited athleticism come to the league and be hyped in the way that he was, I mean, I wonder, you're probably not necessarily going to want a running back after their first contract anyway, but like these guys especially, I have real worries about whether or not he's going to be any sort of long-term anything in this league, especially if this coaching staff flames out this year and is replaced next year with one that doesn't have any ties to drafting a guy like David Montgomery. A lot of people try to put him and Leonard Fournette in the same type of box, and I mean, Leonard Fournette has elite level athleticism, and a lot of people don't realize that. Just because they look the same in being these big guys that don't necessarily get the types of big plays people are expecting from them doesn't mean they're the same type of player. And I think a lot of people forget that when looking at these guys. And comparing David Montgomery to Kareem Hunt, I don't necessarily know what is what with that, but I will say that situation with a running back is the most important thing. I mean, if you put David Montgomery on the Kansas City Chiefs, I don't know if we're having maybe this conversation about David Montgomery, because I think we would have seen a lot better of a first year out of him just because of the other pieces around him in that offense and because of the offensive mind that actually gets to put him in positions to be most effective. I think that's the problem with a lot of analysis, the prospects that are coming out. People rush out to best case scenario expectations with these guys, and that's not often what we see in the true NFL. All right, so let's get actually back to looking at the quarterbacks on this team. We talked about Carson Wentz, Jimmy G, Tom Brady, Gardner Minshew, Nick Foles, and Nick Mullins. I guess Mullins and Jimmy G we can kind of parse into one. Is Minshew good enough for you to be a super flex QB2 at this point? Do you think he's going to be a starter going into the 2021 season after this year, after a full 16 games have been played?
I'm not sure he gets through this year as a 16-game starter. I mean, there's no reason the Jaguars shouldn't add a quarterback, whether it's trading for Andy Dalton or bringing in Cam Newton or drafting a guy. There's just no Gardner Minshew he exceeded expectations year one, but he also provided no reason for a team to say yeah, this is our guy. I remember he lost the job to Nick Foles before Nick Foles played so poorly that there was they were just so far in the tank that there was no reason not to play Minshew out the rest of the way of the season. So I mean, the Jaguars I think should be expected to still add competition. He was a positive Konami guy. He actually led the NFL in scramble attempts last year, which is kind of a fun stat from last year. Especially because he missed, some time, but not playing. Kind of fun, kind of a hair on fire quarterback. He's a guy people want to root for too, because he's like a fun personality. But I see no reason for the Jaguars to really get into bed completely and say this is our franchise guy. I believe they will add competition. Probably better if it is a vet for him than a rookie, because a rookie on a rookie contract is still where he's at right now, so it could be direct competition. But I definitely don't believe the Jaguars should just rest on Gardner Minshew.
And then we've had so much discussion on this show about Jimmy Garoppolo and whether or not he was worth the contract that he was given. That contract was so heavily front-loaded in his first couple of years that right now the San Francisco 49ers essentially have no tie to Jimmy Garoppolo if they choose to move in a different direction. I wanted to ask you what you thought the likelihood of Jimmy Garoppolo being a starting quarterback in the NFL a couple of years from now is, just based on what you've seen so far, with the understanding that, there's a lot that can happen with the San Francisco 49ers, with the way that they've structured their contracts that allow them to kind of chop and change things on their teams very, very quickly. I think this year we're going to see him back again, of course, because of the success that they had getting to the Super Bowl. But if you take the Super Bowl out of that equation, I'm not sure we're still having this same level of energy about Jimmy Garoppolo as is going on in the media right now.
Well, I think there's definitely from a fantasy sense, there's not excitement because he's one of those guys that doesn't run around. But I mean, I think that the shade that he got for last season is kind of extenuous. I mean, this is a guy that came off of an ACL tear and came back and was hyper productive still. With he's not it wasn't a high volume passer, but among the leaders in yards per attempt, QBR, efficiency on deep balls. And the other thing, too, is I think that this has now happened for the second time to Kyle Shanahan, where his teams just haven't scored enough points when it mattered more. I think this could be an offseason, especially draft-wise, and we've kind of seen it with the trade of DeForest Buckner getting up to 13, where the 49ers actually significantly invest into the offensive side of the ball early into the draft. I think we could definitely see that as well. So maybe we see the 49ers play a little more aggressively next season than they did this year based on some of the pieces that they have. Because remember, the front half last year, they still were playing Dante Pettis, Marquise Goodwin. Those were all starting receivers. It wasn't until the back half of the year that Deebo Samuel took off. It wasn't until the back half of the year when they acquired Emmanuel Sanders. Because after Emmanuel Sanders was acquired, Jimmy Garoppolo went on a tear, like a 2-month tear. So, I mean, we could see the 49ers definitely take a more aggressive approach. I think that they want to. But you think when you look at what Jimmy Garoppolo did, I mean, you could still have question marks. Is he an upper echelon quarterback? That's still fair. But coming off the ACL tear and what he did, from performance-wise, was still plenty fine. I mean, he is a guy, though, that does have these lapses in games where he makes just like a throw where you're just like, what did you even possibly see right there? And that happened in that Vikings playoff game. They just didn't throw the rest of the way out. But his performance was a lot better, I think, than a lot of people give it credit for last year.
In terms of these quarterbacks, I mean, I think you're perfectly fine. Wentz, top 10 season last year, I believe he was QB7, QB8. He had that QB3 season 2 years ago, and then he was QB13 coming off the ACL tear. So having him as your QB1's great. And then basically you have the potential to have 5 starting QBs at one point in time. Wentz, Jimmy G, Brady, and Minshew obviously are all starters. And if Jimmy G does get cut, you have Mullins there. And then if Foles becomes a starter over Mitchell Trubisky, you have 5 starters there. So I feel fine with this room. I mean, if I wanted to do something with it, I would try and upgrade my QB2. But honestly, at this point, I think you're pretty fine, especially with the way the rest of your team's built.
Yeah, I'm just fine with QB room is currently constructed. You have the requisite volume to make up for any lack of a ceiling at that QB2 spot. And I think with Tom Brady surrounded by all these weapons, I mean, there's a chance that we can see a boom year out of him even. So there's a chance that you do have some upside here that maybe hasn't presented himself in previous years. So I'm completely fine with this QB room. I really don't think you need to make many changes. I'd actually be actively looking for somebody that truly believed in a guy like Gardner Minshew right now and see what you could potentially get for him before the team goes out and adds another piece into that QB room. But let's move on to running backs. Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, Austin Eckler, Damian Williams, Carlos Hyde, DeAndre Washington seemingly just insulated Damian Williams from further competition in the Kansas City backfield. It seems like every year the entire fantasy community is going on a tear, just campaigning for the Chiefs to draft another running back. And I feel like Andy Reid is just looking at them all and saying, no, I'm fine right here. So I think that this is a great running back room. I think that we are going to see some major regression from a guy like Aaron Jones just because we saw his best games when Jamal Williams was hurt. I think Austin Eckler is going to be fine. I think Damian Williams, again, if he can stay healthy, will be just fine. Alvin Kamara, I expect him to score more touchdowns this year. So, I mean, whatever you lose from Aaron Jones, I think is going to be made up in those other pieces. So for me, this running back room is just as good as your quarterback room, if not better. What are your thoughts on that, Rich?
Yeah, I mean that's a great running back group. I'd be thrilled to have that running back group, especially in a full point PPR, especially because a lot of people didn't realize like Aaron Jones, like he's definitely gonna have scoring regression, obviously coming off the 19 touchdowns and his efficiency and just opportunity he had inside the 5-yard line. But the biggest thing on Aaron Jones is if you look at his just receiving profile, it's gone up every year, and he was actually third of all running backs in air yards last year. He was an opposite of Leonard Fournette, where instead of just these targets were basically a product of checkdowns, they were actually using Aaron Jones vertically in the passing game. They were using him. I know he had that bad drop in that Monday night game against the Lions everyone thinks about, but he had downfield touchdowns this year as a receiver, and that's what you really like. So that gives him a little bit of safer floor. And you talked about he's going to just have inverse touchdown regression between Aaron Jones and Kamara. So you just hope that balances out. But that's a great running back group. I'd be thrilled to have that group of guys.
Yeah, I mean, you're 5 deep. I don't know what's going to happen with Hyde. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes somewhere like, Buffalo, if they're going to bring somebody in just to back up Singletary there and take some load off. But, I mean, Damian Williams is going to be the starter for the Kansas City Chiefs. We saw how great he was in the playoffs. And then, Kamara's still I've had this ongoing feud with one of my other podcasts co-hosts who seems to think Kamara is not elite. And I don't really understand his argument beyond the point, well, you can't expect touchdowns, except for he had 13 and 18 touchdowns his first 2 seasons. Last year just happened to be that he didn't get those touchdowns. So you would expect some regression there, but he was still RB9 last season, despite the lack of touchdowns, which tells me that he's got one of the safest floors among all of the running backs, especially in that with that pass catchers there. So Kamara is a top 5 talent still at running back. I mean, a top 5 dynasty asset at running back. So I wouldn't be worrying about him. If anything, this would be a time to sell because of his usage and just how close the cliff is to Kamara, or that second contract is to Kamara coming up. But I'm not selling him. He's due for a regression. He's probably going to put up another top 10, probably another top 5 season. Like you said, Aaron Jones is going to get some touchdown regression, but he's still going to get his touches, and especially through the air. So I'm fine there. We already know how I feel about Eckler. So this is an elite running back room right now. I mean, your top 3 right there could finish all in the top 10. And really, Damian Williams could be an RB1 as well. So you could have 4 RB1s on that team.
Now, I do want to ask you both, while we're on the subject of Alvin Kamara of the Saints, is there a potential fear of what may happen to his receiving workload this year, just because of the fact that for the first time in a long time, it looks like the Saints did actually invest in a wide receiver too that is going to be halfway decent on this team in Emmanuel Sanders? Since for the longest time, it's been Michael Thomas, nobody else in the wide receiver room for the Saints. And that passing volume has been trending downward, even though I think we had a little bit of a bump last year. So do we think that there is going to be maybe fewer targets available for a guy like Kamara this year because of the presence of another target in that offense outside of the number 1 receiver in the NFL?
I mean, they'll both shed some targets, but tried and true, man. Saints backfield has been hyper productive in PPR formats since Drew Brees has been there. So as long as number 9's back there, I mean, I still would say that he would be among the league leaders in probability to lead, behind McCaffrey in targets and catches. He's going to be up there still, just because that's what that offense does. They utilize the running back out of the backfield. That's what Drew Brees does.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not concerned at all. Even if he goes down to, let's just say 80, 85 targets, I mean, if his touchdowns, even if he scores 2 more touchdowns, he's mitigated that loss and then some there. So I'm not concerned at all about Kamara.
If you're a win now team, are you interested at all in Emmanuel Sanders?
I mean, sure, if you're there, like, and you're not giving up, anything outside of maybe a 4th or a late 3rd for him. But he's the type of guy I believe is, probably pretty available in season as well. He's not someone I would have rushed get in the off season. It'd be more along the lines of when I need this as it comes up in season, I would pursue. But yeah, I mean, if the price is right and you're getting him for basically what you should be getting him for, I don't have any problem with that.
If he's your wide receiver 4 or wide receiver 5, I mean,
right.
At that point, you just don't take any risk there. As long as you're not taking a risk and saying, okay, well, I expect Emmanuel Sanders to be a wide receiver 3 this season. I wouldn't be banking on that. He could be, but I would rather he be wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, bye week fill-in. And if he's a wide receiver 3, fantastic.
Julio Jones, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, Keenan Allen, Deshaun Hamilton, and Russell Gage. Julio Jones is Julio Jones. He's a locked-in wide receiver 1. Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf. Talk to me about that. I think we saw as DK Metcalf started to get more involved in the offense, started to get more used in the offense, we actually saw a little bit of a drop-off from Tyler Lockett this year. Do we think the presence of the other one kind of keeps both of them down? Because what we're seeing right now is DLF is pricing DK Metcalf as wide receiver 15 overall in Dynasty leagues right now. I think that is too damn high. Are you of the same opinion, or do you think that that's kind of right in line of where he should be?
It's probably just a little high, but I don't think it's egregious, especially because we're starting to have some rollover at the wide receiver position, in terms of wide receiver age, and then he's such a touchdown president, has attachment to a quarterback that leads the NFL in end zone targets every year, and he actually DK Metcalf led the NFL in end zone targets as a rookie. He matched or bested Tyler Lockett in targets in 10 of 18 games last season. And definitely down the stretch. So, I mean, they're kind of more of like a 1A, 1B scenario than having like a true alpha there. And then if anyone was to manifest as a true alpha, I mean, you'd have to bet on Metcalf just because of his archetype. But, we still need more passing volume from that offense. It's probably a situation where the overall volume of the offense is going to cap both of their upside. They're both going to probably have lean weeks and leaner target weeks than we really want from like our wide receiver too. And, Lockett's a guy that's gotten by for stretches on that, but he's also shown last season that he had like his first like down stretch of efficiency, and we kind of saw like where the floor kind of lies, and he bounced back the final few weeks of the season. But he had a stretch there for the stretch playoff run for us in fantasy, like where he was basically not usable, and that's probably what we still have to worry about from a floor from in that Seattle offense. So yeah, I mean, he might be priced a little bit high, but I don't think it's really egregious from a dynasty stance. Just because we're starting to see some of these older guys start to kind of hit the age apex. I mean, Julio is kind of in like a whole dynasty tier of himself because when you factor in like his age, projected volume, and like still effectiveness, there really isn't anyone like that. Because like T.Y. Hilton's no longer in that bucket. A.J. Green's not in that bucket. Like we can't count on those guys to be wide receiver ones or project them to be wide receiver ones. Like we still can Julio Jones, but the thing is that. And this is a roster that's very good, and it's fine to have Julio Jones on this roster. But like Julio Jones can no longer do anything to help his fantasy value. It's only going to go down from here on out. He could have another 1,300-yard season. It's not going to matter. His value is going to depreciate going into next season. So I mean, he's on the right roster here, but a lot of teams have held Julio Jones longer than they should have.
Yeah, I think at this point, Julio is probably going to die on your roster unless somebody – it goes win now,
or you get a trade in season,
right? Well, and really, it's if you have Julio Jones on a rebuild roster and you need to be objective about that, and you can sell him for a 2021st, I would be doing that in a heartbeat because, like you said, it's either you're going to have him on your roster or you better be selling to a win now team and rebuilding. I'm not in love with having Lockett and DK on the same team. I just don't like having, unless they're like elite assets, I just don't like having two of the same player on a team or two of the same position on a team. So Lockett, his value is probably worse than DK, but I don't think you can sell DK at this point. So I don't think there's anything you can really do there. Keenan Allen, he should be okay. He's still at least a top 24, probably top 18 wide receiver, even with Tyrod. But he's a little iffy. I don't like the depth here. You have your four deep. I'm not in love with Dejon Hamilton. He's a fine NFL wide receiver. I just don't think he's going to do much for you in terms of fantasy football. And then Russell Gage, who is, I believe, the wide receiver 3 for Atlanta. So you actually have two sets of wide receivers on the same team. So I think you need to add at least another like kind of wide receiver 3-ish to feel better about. You have a lot of assets here that you can sell to get there. Like Eitan said earlier about QBs, you could sell Minshew to somebody who needs a third QB, especially in Superflex, and either get a pick or get a wide receiver. You could sell one of the running backs, preferably Aaron Jones, just because of where his value's at. Break it down into another starting running back and a starting wide receiver. That's another route you can take. But yeah, I think you need to increase your depth here because after Julio, it kind of gets a little iffy in terms of your stability. So I think if you got a more stable wide receiver, I feel a lot better about this wide receiver room.
Yeah, definitely a wide receiver group that, could definitely be really ugly in a year or two. It could definitely look bad, but you got those running backs to carry you, hopefully, this season, even if Keenan has, decline, he's still going to perform at a wide receiver 2+. That's what you're holding on to. But it could easily be a situation where, Obviously Julio can increase his value, or Keenan has a T.Y. Hilton type of situation, from last year where it kind of craters out on him. That's like the one fear that you kind of get here, is that it could get ugly in a hurry, because you said that lack of depth, and the top is heavier with people that are on the back end of the age apex outside of DK.
Yeah, that's exactly the point that I was going to make right here. This is a great wide receiver room for right now. Be very, very careful with how long you carry these guys, or with not getting youth to backfill this roster, because it can be a championship contender, and it can be a team that doesn't make the playoffs in the next season. It's kind of one of those situations. So just be careful about how you continue to fill this roster going forward. And finally, we're going to go to the tight ends: Travis Kelce, Tyler Higbee, Jay Sternberger, Hayden Hurst, Tyler Kroft, Tyler Eifert, and Jimmy Graham. Kelce, Higbee, I think they're going to be within the top 8 tight ends, of course. Kelce, he's always within a shout of tight end 1, if he's not still tight end 1 in fantasy and in Dynasty. Higbee, we just mentioned what he can do, especially with the departure of Brandon Cooks and the extra targets that opens up. Let's talk about Hayden Hurst. A lot of people are excited about Hayden Hurst. I don't necessarily know if I feel the same way, but I will say that one of the things that made Austin Hooper last year wasn't necessarily the talent level or the prowess of Austin Hooper. It was just the fact that there were so many targets available in that offense, and they seem to still have not really addressed that number 3 target in that offense. So do we think that maybe we're undervaluing Hayden Hurst at this point, or is it because, we've already kind of seen what we need to see from him, and we just don't think that he is going to be a pass catcher, even if he's kind of asked to do so in Atlanta?
Well, he's only in his 3rd year. He's a first-round pick. He's a little older. He will be 27 at the start of the season. But he's going from the NFL team that ran the fewest amount of pass plays last season, just 467, to be the tight end 1 on a team that ran the most pass plays in the NFL at 735. So almost 300 more passing plays the Falcons ran than the Baltimore Ravens, which is what you said, carried a guy like Austin Hooper, who's more of a limited physical type of player. Austin Hooper's more of a catch and fall down tight end. He's like he's a deluxe Jack Doyle in a way. He's not getting you any yak. He's just basically predicated on volume. Hayden Hurst does have a little bit of athleticism to his game. He was 12th in yards per route run, just no opportunity. And with them not filling that void, this is a good roster altogether, because he's got 2 guys that are at 27 years old, and Higbee and Hurst as his tight end 2s, while he's got an alpha in Travis Kelce, who's going to finish his career playing with the QB1 of Dynasty. It's a really good group of tight ends to have: a tight end 1, a tight end 2, and a tight end 3 that good in a tight end premium type of format. I would be more than happy riding out Hayden Hurst as a tight end 3. If he's your tight end 1, you might want some more insulation there, but I think this is a great spot to have Hayden Hurst, right type of roster to have him.
So you have you're super deep at QB and tight end in terms of number of starters, potential starters. Kelce, Higbee, Sternberger, Hurst, Eifert, and Graham are all potential starters. Eifert in Jacksonville. Poor rest in peace, my Josh Oliver shares.
Just for 2 games, he'll be fine after that.
That's fine.
He's probably gonna be hurt.
But yeah, and this is a 2 tight end and 1.5 tight end premium, so it puts a gigantic premium on tight ends. So having 3 deep starters at the very least in terms of Kelce, Higbee, and Hurst. We'll see what Sternberger can do in that starting role, and then Graham is going to be the starter in Chicago, whatever that means. So having that many tight ends is actually a good idea, because you can fill in those flex positions with tight ends as well. So there's nothing to hate here. If there was going to be somebody I'm selling, it's probably Higbee at this point after that Brandon Cooks trade, because I agree with Rich here that Higbee and Everett are probably the biggest benefactors of that. We saw Higbee absolutely dominate at the end of the season last season. But
it's Apex. It's Apex price point though.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But yeah, Kelce Kelsey and Higbee as your 2 tight ends, that's going to be pretty formidable because, as Rich said, Higbee could be a top 5 tight end at the end of the season next season, with everything that's gone on this offseason and what we saw at the end of the season. So having those type of tight ends in a 2 tight end league with 1.5 tight end premium, I mean, there's not much you can do better than that.
All right, so draft picks, round this out. It's only 2/4, 2/5. Really not much to say there. But I mean, if there was a guy that you had to take a shot at with a 4th or 5th round pick in this draft, who would it be, Rich?
The rookie, I'm trying to think like who's going that late. I've actually done a couple. I could pull it up and just see, because I actually have done a couple where we do draft pre-draft, and it's a super flex league to kind of base off of this. Pulling it up here, looking at the 4th round, I can just run it through you guys. So this is the 4th round in a tight end premium super flex league. Starting at 401, it was Donovan Peoples-Jones, Antonio Gandy-Golden, Van Jefferson, Hunter Bryant, Darrington Evans, Harrison Bryant, Lynn Bowden, Anthony McFarland, Bryson Hopkins, Jake Fromm, Michael Warren, Gabriel Davis. I don't know who your guys' favorite flavors out of like that group of guys are. I mean, you got a couple tight ends mixed in there. Obviously, it's not a great tight end class, period. Just not a really good tight end class overall. So that's where you see some of those guys go. I mean, I like Darrington Evans a little bit, but he's another guy that's probably going to project to be more of like a satellite back, going to have to cut his teeth on special teams. And we're talking 4th rounders anyway. It's not like we're everyone you've got to kind of like.
We're hoping these guys are on a roster in 2 seasons. Yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
I don't know. LaMichael Pirine, he's interesting going that late. I think he could make an impact right away, but of course, again, talking 4th and 5th rounders here, so you're not really taking a big chance here.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell by the roster you laid out up until this point, by some of the veterans on this roster, and then the draft picks that he has remaining or she has remaining, that this is a team that, obviously was contending last year and, kind of was going for it. I hope it worked out and they were able to cash in. But you can definitely tell that this roster has skewed towards being a contender and has hung on to some of these pieces or traded for some of these veterans, recently over these last couple of years.
Yeah. So, I mean, in 2021, you at this point almost probably should be starting to acquire picks for the 2021 class, because if you're trying to go into 2022 with this roster, it's not going to look pretty. It's not going to look the same way that it does right now. And I think that's the fear here. So the way that we end every show, Rich, is this is called the Dynasty Diagnostic. We're currently at the service center right now. So we describe all of these rosters in card terms. So if you had to put card terms to this roster and you had to say it was either some type of car or it had some type of car issue with it, what would you say this roster is?
Oh boy, man, you've got me out of my element here in a big way. I am not a car guy at any level.
Neither are we, Rich. It's fine.
You're in good company.
We just make it up as we go.
Yeah, I hear that. I'm trying to think of like a comparable car like this could be, man. Is because I mean it's a good roster, but like you said, there are definitely there's potential for this roster to get ugly in real quick. It definitely could use a little maintenance. And I understand some of these names are hard to move because it's a contending roster. You're saying, well, I have these guys that I'm playing for now. I don't want to sell these guys for pieces that are helping me rebuild. But obviously, there are a number of guys here that are past that point of one where you could get the apex cost on, and then 2 could easily crater out here. So I mean, I want to say I don't know if it's like you've got this thing paid off, and you want to you're just trying to ride and squeeze as many years as you can out of it, because you've got no car payment. That's kind of like where we are with this roster. But it could definitely, you could have lose a transmission along the way or something real quick here, to where you've got to sink more money into it than it's worth at this point.
Yeah. I mean, this is an old school Royce. It is a nice car. It is going to make you the talk of the town. However, the maintenance payments are going to surpass any value this car actually has very, very quickly. And if you want to get anything out of this, it's now the time to start trying to find ways to backfill your roster with younger talent, even if that means using this maybe last opportunity that you have to sell Keenan Allen with some uncertainty over what he might be this season before the season, and eat the whatever you lose in terms of production on a younger asset. I think you really need to start thinking about the immediate future of this team now so that it doesn't become an extended rebuild when this is all said and done after this year, most likely.
So this, there's two analogies I can get out of this. It's either a car that is approaching its 3-year, 36,000 mile warranty. So it's been a perfect car for you, but you're approaching the end of that warranty, the end of the life of this roster, or the good life of this roster. And you need to, you can still get some very good miles out of it, but maybe you need to replace a couple things before the warranty's over. So that's where I sell Gardner Minshew for a wide receiver here. Or it's a high performance, either IndyCar or NASCAR car where you're going towards it. You've been running great all day. You've been atop the pole the entire day, and you're approaching the end of the race, and you've been running this thing hard, and it's getting hot and it's getting tired, and you want to win. So you're going to try to spend as little time as possible in the pit. So you only get 2 tires, and you don't even fill with gas. You just you just fill with like half a gas tank. So you can kind of get through the finish without sacrificing time. And that's where we're at with this. And those 2 tires represent, okay, like let's try and get another wide receiver 2 or 3 that's more stable here, so we can get through one more championship before everything starts to fall apart.
Yeah, I would say just off the top of my head, running through that roster, like your main assets to shop at this point in terms of getting pieces back would be Keenan Allen, Tyler Lockett, Tyler Higbee, Hayden Hurst, and Aaron Jones. Like those would be the guys. Like I understand that you wouldn't have you're not going to move all those guys, but those are the guys I think you'd get the most kind of bang for your buck in terms of price point right now. Probably Keenan Allen less on that, but I think those are the guys that can net you the most positive return in terms of reshaping this immediately without giving up a lot of ground.
Absolutely. I love it. I love the show. This has been a great show. Thank you so much, Rich, for joining us. This has been it for today. Thank you so much for listening to us, people out there. And please make sure to follow your head technicians. You can find me at Eitan Alive. You can find Sam at FF Stompy. You can find Rich at Lord Reeves. And please make sure you're going to the Dynasty Diagnostic podcast feed on iTunes, giving us a 5-star rating and review. Really helps the podcast grow and reach more listeners. Sam, do you want to talk about the Patreon and the store envy before we get off here?
Yeah, go to patreon.com/dinodiagnostic. We appreciate the support. We put a lot of time and effort into this, buying equipment, stuff like that. And if you enjoy shows, you get things like live streams. You could have watched Rich talk today. Could have watched Matthew Berry as well. You can get a T-shirt. You can get it into a private chat, stuff like that. So, I mean, any help is welcome. So yeah, that's patreon.com/dinodiagnostic. And then if you go to storeenvy.com and search FF Pod Shirts, that's Dynasty Outhouse's store. We have 2 shirts and a sticker on there. Trade Addicts has shirts, mugs, sweaters. Top Shelf DFF, I believe, still has some shirts. Superflex Super Show has shirts and stickers. And 10% goes to Fantasy Care, Scott Fish's charity. So not only are you supporting us and other podcasts that we enjoy, but you're supporting a great cause that Scott Fish has been an absolute saint among the fantasy football community for starting.
And thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen out there that are listening to the show, for making it to the Dynasty Diagnostic Service Center today. Please be sure to keep up with your scheduled maintenance. Catch us next time to ensure quality performance. See you on your next visit, and stay safe out there for all of you guys that are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Have a good one, guys. See you next time.